Okay, finally time for our last section of chapter 10, and that section is called the equation of a circle. And just like certain things in math, there's like formulas basically that you can use. The equation of a circle is basically a formula that you can write so that you know where a circle is at in a coordinate plane, how big it is based on its radius, things like that, and then an ordered pair that you can find on that circle. So our formula is right down here. Okay, it is r squared equals x minus h squared plus y minus k squared. Okay, if you notice, there are quite a few variables in there. So let's start with one that we probably should know, right? If we are talking about the radius, r, that's going, or excuse me, if we're talking about r, that is going to be our radius. Okay, so that basically a radius will tell us how big our circle is, right? That tells us, if we have a radius of 5 versus a radius of 10, the 10 is going to be way bigger. So the radius is our r, so we're going to have a number there for r squared, okay? And then we have up here, we've got arrows pointing to x and y, okay? First of all, x and y are going to be part of our equation, so they are going to stay. They're going to be part of our answer, okay? So there's not going to be numbers for x or for y, and x and y just represent any point on the circle. Okay, so when we are all done, there will be an x and there will be a y. Those will not be numbers. The radius, that's going to be a number. Okay, and then we have these two letters h and k. Okay, h and k represent the center of the circle. So if you notice up here on the top it says center hk. So the ordered pair hk is the center of the circle, and h represents the x value of the center. And k represents the y value of the center. So basically, that hk value, the center of the circle, just tells us where it's at on a coordinate plane. So if the center is at 0, 0, it's at a certain part of the coordinate plane. If the center of the circle is way out over at 100, 250, it's going to be way over on the top right. So we're going to have that center of the circle tells us where it's at on the coordinate plane, and then the radius tells us how big it is. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at some equations here. Okay, so we have an equation of a circle. What I want you to notice is, first of all, there's an x and there's a y. Okay, that's part of the equation. That does not have a number value with it. And then the other thing I want us to notice is over here by itself, r squared. Remember, this was r squared, which means if we want to know what the radius is, we don't want r squared, right? Because that, if you remember back on our formula, r squared was 64 here. But if we want r, we're just going to take the square root of both sides, and we're going to get that our radius is 8. So we're basically, in order to find our radius, we have to take the square root each time. The center, okay, if you remember, the center, let's look at our formula down here, is x minus h, y minus k. So if you notice also, the minus sign is part of our formula, okay? So if we have x minus 5 and y minus 2, that means that our center is going to be at positive 5, positive 2. Okay, so let's look over here at number 2 because there's something slightly different about number 2. Okay, here we have, again, x and y, part of our equation. Our radius, remember, is over here by itself, but that was r squared as part of our formula. So r squared is 4. So if we take the square root of both sides, we get that our radius is going to be 2. Now the center of our circle, if you look, this one is a plus, this one is a minus. So what does it mean? How did I actually get x plus 3? So if you think about mathematically speaking, if we wanted to have a subtraction sign in between the x and the 3, we'd have x minus negative 3. Okay, so those, what I have written in green there and the values right above it are the same thing. So now I have a minus sign, just like my formula does, which means my h value is going to be negative 3. So my x value of my center is negative 3. And if you notice over on this one over here, it's already y minus 1. The minus is part of the formula. It's already there. So it would be 1 would be the y value of our center of our circle. So just kind of thinking what that information tells us, if I have a coordinate plane, okay, the center of my circle would be at negative 3, 1, and my radius would be 2. Oops, that's not a very good circle, but that tells you kind of where it would be and what it would look like. Okay, so let's come back over here to number 3. Okay, our radius, remember, is always by itself on one side, and that tells us what r squared is. So r squared is 1, which means to find out what 1 is, we have to take the square root. So our radius is also going to be 1. Our center, here's a subtraction sign. Okay, there's nothing added or subtracted to the y right now, which means, let me erase that. Another way to think about that is we could write it as y minus 0 squared. Okay, so y squared, and whether you add 0 or subtract 0, it doesn't really matter. It's still going to be y squared, but that kind of gives us a value for our h and our k. So if you look, we've got a subtraction sign here already. So since it's subtraction, our center is going to be positive 5. And then there is nothing added or subtracted on here, so it would be 0. One more over here. Okay, here we have 225, and remember when it's given to us, our radius squared is 225. So if we take the square root of both sides, our radius would be 5. Okay, and then we're looking at, here's our x minus 6, y plus 9. Okay, the subtraction sign is part of our formula, which means our x value of our center is going to be positive 6. And y plus 9, you know, if we're not sure, we can remember a rule that if it's, you know, these signs are always going to be opposite, or we could say y minus negative 9 squared. So now we have a subtraction sign that's part of our formula, just like we like, and our y value of our center is going to be negative 9. So if you notice, just some observations here to make sure we know, if we have a subtraction sign inside of our squared, that means if it's x minus 5, it's going to be positive 5. Y minus 2 means positive 2. We have x plus 3, that means we're going to be negative 3. Y minus 1 would be positive. We've got a negative here with the 5, which means our center is going to be positive. We have a negative here with the 6, which means our center is going to be positive 6. A positive here with the 9, which means we're going to have negative 9. So you just have to kind of think about how to remember that when you go to find your centers. And then the only other thing we're going to do is we're going to write that equation in this form, given the center and the radius. So now, instead of given the equation, say what the center and radius is, now I am going to give you the center and radius, and you have to write your equation. So we have our formula down here. We've got r squared. Well, our radius is 8, so we're going to have 8 squared. And then in our first set of parentheses squared, second set of parentheses squared. Okay, always x is first, y is second. I have positive 4 and positive 7. Okay, if they are positive, that means I'm going to have x minus 4, y minus 7. And so technically, like on the class kick, what you would want to write is 64, because you want to go ahead and square that radius, is x minus 4 squared plus y minus 7 squared. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at this next one. I've got a center at negative 2 positive 5, and a radius of 7. So let's start with my radius. I square my radius inside my first set of parentheses squared plus my second set of parentheses squared. My first always has x, my second always has y. If I have negative 2, that is essentially going to be minus negative 2. And then I have a positive 5, which would be minus 5. So when I simplify this all out, the easiest way to write it, 7 squared is 49. X minus negative 2 is going to be x plus 2. So notice negative 2 means plus 2 inside of our parentheses. And then positive 5 would mean we'd have y minus 5 squared. Okay, so when you go to write it in your class cake, you're going to need to simplify it like that so that you have the pluses where they're supposed to be, minuses where they're supposed to be, and then actually square your radius. Okay, so let's just do a couple more here real quick. My radius is 4, so it's always r squared. So we're going to have 4 squared. Okay, I have 2 sets of parentheses squared with a plus sign in between. X always comes first, y always comes second. My formula is x minus h, so I'm going to have x minus 4. Then I'm going to have y minus negative 2, because that's a negative right there, which means when I square 4, I get 16. My x minus 4 stays like x minus 4 squared, plus a minus a negative is going to be y plus 2 squared. And that's how you would want to make sure you write it. It's simpler form. We're not going to box method multiply anything out. This is the form we are going to leave it in. And then the last one here, we've got a center at negative 1, negative 9, and a radius of 5. So our r squared is going to be 5 squared. Oops, not plus. Sorry about that. Equals. Okay, we're going to have 2 sets of parentheses squared with a plus sign in between them. We're going to have an x and a y. So I'm going to have x minus negative 1. So I'm going to kind of skip right ahead. I'm going to say x minus negative 1 is x plus 1. Y minus negative 9 is y plus 9. So the only thing we would need to fix here is 5 squared is 25. X plus 1 squared. And y plus 9 squared. Okay, good luck. There's a class kick for you to work on. And let me know if you have any questions.